Between 4 and 6 times a year, we get a request for more information about the 2 bonnets on display in the OA Gallery here at the National Scouting Museum. Joining me today is Tim Brown, a member of the National Scouting Museum Task Force, to talk about the history of these bonnets and their predecessor in this edition of Artifact of the Week. Tim, thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to talk to us. About 4 times a year, we get a request for some information about the bonnets hanging behind us. Tell us a little bit about the history of these 2 bonnets.
Well, the bonnets behind us here are known as the National Chief and National Vice Chief bonnets. There originally was only one bonnet, and that was made by members of Anarchist Lodge in 1938 for their former lodge chief, Joseph Brunton, who had just recently been elected National Chief in 1938. And he wore the bonnet his two-year term, and then in 1940 he presented the bonnet in the passing of the bonnet that became known as that to George Mazalis, who came in 1940 out of Chicago.
Why are these 2 bonnets here? How did they come about if we had this bonnet from 1936?
That's a good question. Yeah, the bonnet was used, the National Chief bonnet was used for approximately 40 years. And then, unfortunately, was lost in a fire at the National Office in 1980. And the idea was then to try to find a way to recreate that bonnet. And the suggestion was made, why don't we make 2 bonnets, one for the National Chief and one for the National Vice Chief, which is what they did.
So you've got these 2 bonnets, you've had them made. Who made them? How were they manufactured?
Well, the original bonnet was made out of golden eagle feathers. And of course, we didn't have a supply of golden eagle feathers to make these 2 bonnets. So we reached out to the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife and asked them for some help. And they had a couple of confiscated bonnets that were in pretty poor shape, but the feathers were also golden eagle feathers and could be used to recreate a new bonnet or 2 new bonnets. So the National Oriole Committee contracted with a gentleman named Ed Benz out of Canyon, Texas, because he was a former region chief, Eagle Scout, but was also a well-known craftsman in making bonnets. And Ed took on the task. I think they paid him $1,000 to make the 2 bonnets. And it took him about 18 months to make the 2 bonnets that we have behind us. And they became known as the replacement bonnets. They were also made out of original golden eagle feathers, and they're tipped with white owl feathers.
And so tell us a little bit about what the components are of these bonnets. What are they made up of? What makes them special?
Well, the feathers themselves are, golden eagle feathers. Golden eagles and bald eagles are threatened and have previously been endangered species, so they're protected. But the skull cap is made out of leather, and they got some intricate beadwork. They also have ermine tails hanging from each side of the bonnet. So very, very intricate, very unique in a lot of ways.
Is there any symbolism behind the beadwork that's on them?
Not that I know of. That was just something that Ed Borger chose to do. And of course, the 2 bonnets are different. You can definitely tell the difference in the beadwork on the National Chief bonnet versus that of the National Vice Chief bonnet.
No, and I believe it's the Vice Chief bonnet. There's a yellow ribbon. What's the story behind that yellow ribbon?
Yeah, that's a yellow memorial ribbon, and sadly, that was put on there for Josh Sain. He was the National Vice Chief who was tragically killed while in office in 1997 in a car crash. And the National Committee decided to place a memorial ribbon on the National Vice Chief's bonnet for perpetual, this as long as the bonnet existed, so that it would remind everybody of Josh Sain.
So we've got these 2 bonnets. They're here in the museum. Why are they in the museum as opposed to out being worn by the Chief and Vice Chief?
Well, actually, the National Committee put out a protected feathers clarification policy as far back as 1976, which basically prohibited the use of animal parts, including birds, in the making of Native American regalia. We had a special permit to use these, but we felt like after 20 years of their use, from roughly 1982 until roughly 2004, that we ought to follow our own policy, and they decided to retire these bonnets. So these were known as the replacement bonnets and now are called the retired bonnets. And 2 new bonnets were created to replace them, and they're known as the replica bonnets. And I can tell you how those were made if you'd like as well.
Sure, let's talk about the replica bonnet.
Yeah, the replica bonnets, 2 gentlemen, Ron Bell and Wayne Dukes. The two of them served on the National OA Committee. Both of them were advisors, lead advisors with American Indian events. And Ron Bell was tasked to recreate the beadwork to match identically the beadwork that was on the original bonnets. And then Wayne Dukes did the feather work. And the two of them did that and completed it, and they were first used, I think, in 2004.
Now,
2006.
In between these two bonnets, there's a case that used to be used to carry the case. Now, I've heard a story about how it got back here to the museum, but what's the story behind that case?
Yeah, that case was created when the first bonnet, the single bonnet, and basically it's just a giant leather portfolio that they carried. They folded, if you can believe it, they folded the National Chief bonnet and put it in this thing and carried it around. And somehow it was lost at the 1965 National Conference and was discovered approximately 50 years later, and was returned, and we now show it here in the case with the bonnets. The unique thing about the portfolio is that every national chief had a business card, and he would write a little note on it to the incoming national chief, and those cards were placed in the portfolio, and that happened all the way up until 1965.
Is there anything else about the history of these bonnets that's important that we should share with the folks watching this about how it fits into the Order of the Arrow?
The founders, Dr. Goodman and Carol Edson, selected Native American lore as a way to attract and tell the story to young people, and that has stuck with scouting for years or for decades, with Ernest Thompson Seton and other people that had Native American organizations. But the bonnet has basically become the national symbol in a lot of ways. These bonnets are kind of our icon of the Order of the Arrow, and on our handbooks and literature for decades was the bonnet of a Native American. So it's been a very important role, has played a very important role in the history of the Order of the Arrow and the connection with Native America.
Tim, we appreciate your time and talking to us about these bonnets. That's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of the Boy Scouts of America through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.